Shalom Havarim. It's great to be in Scotland and it's great to be in Edinburgh. I can actually breathe because living in Surrey, we've had temperatures as high as 33 degrees. And so to come up here and to see the fog, to feel the rain, it's an absolute pleasure and an absolute delight. So it's an absolute pleasure to be up here in Scotland with you all this morning. So Boker Tov, you are the brave ones, you are the courageous ones, you are the remnant, because you are standing with Israel and the Jewish people. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be here at the ICEJ UK Scotland Conference. So you can give yourself a round of applause for being here. Well done. I just want to say a few things before I start. It's an absolute honour and a privilege to work with the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, UK. The love and support that I've received from David and for the rest of the team has been absolutely phenomenal. And this is a ministry that is made up of people that have a heart and a passion for God and a passion for his people and his land. And ever since I've been working with the ICEJ UK, since just after around COVID times, it's like a family, and they mean so much. And this is my third speaking engagement in a row, giving up 3 weekends in a row. So I'm sorry Steve has seen me as well, because I was speaking at the CMJ UK conference last Saturday. So Steve was there, the leader of ISU, the wonderful band. I just want to share a little bit. I think it's important to touch on your heritage, being Scotland. Now, I'm sorry that Scotland didn't get through the group stage, nearly gave Morocco a run for the money, which was a shame. Would have liked to have seen Scotland gone through, particularly after that incredible performance against Denmark to actually qualify for the World Cup. The first time since France 98. So and it's great to see at the airport and see all the players. But I want to just kind of draw inspiration from another famous Scottish sportsman who had a huge impact on my life growing up as a teenager. And that was the great Eric Liddell, who lived in Edinburgh, who lived in this city, who loved the Lord. And in the Paris Olympic Games of 1924, literally 102 years ago, refused to run on a Sunday because he felt that this was God's holy day and you shouldn't actually dishonor the Sabbath. I remember being interested in running when I took it up at the age of, 13. And I took up running because I wanted to improve my football, because I was always quite fast on the wing. And it has then developed a love for running, and then I loved the Lord, and then reading the autobiography of Eric Liddell was inspirational, and then seeing the film. And like Eric, at school, I got ridiculed because I run for my school, I'd run for my county, cross country or trail running, and I got a lot of ridicule because I wouldn't run on a Sunday. And that is because I learned from Eric that if you're going to stand up for what you believe in, you stand up for them. And I'm one of these personalities that if everyone's going that way, I'll go that way. So it's inherent in my personality. But I just want to share before I unpack where I think we are in terms of geostrategic politics regarding Israel, the challenges facing Israel and the West and where we are prophetically. I want to share a personal story and a personal testimony. Ever since I have grown up, and there are pictures my parents have of me as like a 4-year-old, and I've literally got in my hand a Spitfire, which is obviously the iconic aircraft that fought in the Battle of Britain and defended these skies from Nazi invasion and Nazi tyranny. And so I've always had this immense passion and love for Spitfires. You only have to speak to my wife, Katie, and you realize how many Spitfires are in the house and how many pictures there are. But on my wall in our lounge is one of my favorite possessions, and this is called D-Day Breakout, and has these Supermarine Spitfires flying over Normandy with that markings, with the white and black markings on the wing, to actually show that this started the liberation of Europe, and this was signed by many of the pilots that took part in D-Day. in June of 1944. I spoke up in Lincoln a couple of weeks ago, and then I literally that week, about a week ago, was one of the toughest I've ever had in broadcasting. Just got to a point where I got so despondent, I got so discouraged, I thought, I don't know if I can continue doing this anymore. And I can remember coming home after recording a program, really hot weather, and I just felt like I wanted to cry. And I don't normally cry, that's not my thing. Primarily because of the stuff that I have to look at, interviewing Holocaust survivors, interviewing victims of terrorism, visiting Israel in the aftermath of October the 7th, interviewing Holocaust survivors as well as survivors of the Nova Music Festival and hostages families, and seeing the hatred that there is towards Israel and the Palestinian Arab media and their education system. So I'm quite immune to a lot of this stuff. But literally, I felt like breaking point. And as I got home, I felt like I want to cry and say, Simon, come, pick yourself up together. You don't need to do that. Anyway, so I heard this roar outside. The house started to shake, so I looked up. I went outside into my garden, and flying above the house was a Supermarine Spitfire flying at low altitude, just above the house. Now, it's rare. It's very, very rare. Even where I live in Surrey, to actually see Spitfires flying. And I felt then, as I saw it fly over, I did this, punched my fist in the air and shouted, yes. And then I cried. And I really felt the Lord say to me how much he loved me and how he's got me in his hands. That's the first Spitfire. So anyway, later that Friday, this happened on the Wednesday. On the Friday, before driving up to Staffordshire for the CMJ UK Conference, Katie and myself and our dog, we went down to Portsmouth for the day. And it was hot. It wasn't as hot as it has been. It was like 25 degrees. So we felt it was important to take our dog to the beach and go to the beach there as well. So we started walking along. And I got to the Portsmouth ferry terminal. And just in the corner of my eye, I saw this it looked like a tail of an aircraft. And I'm like, what's that? And being a journalist, I just have this natural curiosity. It can get you in a lot of trouble. Yeah, there's that famous saying, curiosity killed the cat. There is a danger in being very curious, but I'm very curious by nature. So I then walked around the corner, and I literally then saw on this truck a Supermarine Spitfire. I thought, wow, literally two in 2 days. So I thought, wow, this is amazing. So I went up to the guy and I said, look, can I take a picture of it? So I said, sure, take a picture of it. So I went up and he said, you better hurry up because we're about to deport to the Isle of Wight. So I took the picture, touched the Spitfire, and then asked him as a journalist, what's the story behind this Spitfire? So he tells me, he says this Spitfire was shot down after D-Day in Belgium, and the pilot managed to escape the Nazi occupation. And then the next day he was back in England flying other Spitfire sorties against the Germans. But this was a labor of love for this guy. He had rebuilt this Spitfire from a wreck. Took him 8 years. So I thanked him for restoring British heritage and for what he's done. And I said, look, the Spitfire is that iconic symbol of our freedom. That's why I love it so much. So anyway, he gave me his card. He thanked me very much. And I thought, okay, this is good. This is more encouragement. 2 Spitfires in 2 days. Wait, it gets better. And I spoke last Saturday, 2 speaking sessions in a row. So thankfully I don't have to do that because it's a bit of a nightmare when you speak for 1 hour, 10-minute break, and then you've got to speak again. So that was on the Saturday. And then on the Sunday, I was just about to leave to go and drive home, and I saw someone that I'd met, and I was chatting to them, and suddenly I heard this roar in the sky, and I thought, I know that Rolls-Royce engine anywhere. So I looked up and I saw that iconic Spitfire, but this time, this Spitfire was doing a personal air show for me. No one else around. It was just flying around the grounds of the campus where CMJ had been based. But this time I felt the Lord saying that once again, we are going to have to fight for our freedom. And that's where we are. So I have never been a believer since I was 14, and that's in 1989. I have never, ever experienced God's love in showing me how much he loved me by showing me and communicating through this beautiful aircraft that is the Spitfire. And it's something I think all of us can take hold of, that we are living in dark times. We are living in very dangerous times, but God loves us with an unconditional love. Never doubt his love. And I mean, the wonderful example is our good friend John here. He loves the Lord Jesus so much, and the Lord loves him so much. And he's going to be on an incredible journey. But the Lord has a plan and purpose for all of us. So when you get to those times where you get despondent, you feel like you feel discouraged, you feel like you can't go anymore, all but God, because he loves us. So that's a little bit about where we are. And to do the programs that I do, particularly the Middle East Report for Revelation TV, this is my aircraft. This is my fighter plane of war. Every time I'm on the studios, this is me going to war in defense of Israel and the Jewish people, because essentially what we are fighting is a media war and a social media war being fought against Israel. Lies, misinformation, demonization, where the casualty is truth. And we can see in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 2, that Satan is called the prince of the power of the air. And that is exactly what we're fighting. Is it any wonder that people's hearts and minds are being influenced when they see a news report on Israel? And this turns their hearts against Israel. It turns their minds against Israel, because Satan, our adversary, controls the airwaves. And it's important to take that into account. Now, when it comes to kind of media and this media war against Israel, it's relentless. It is absolutely relentless. I mean, I've never known a time in broadcasting where our main broadcasters, whether that's the BBC, we know the BBC is biased. It's not called the British Biased Corporation for nothing. We also see, for example, now ITN's news coverage. What do you call it up in Scotland? STV, right? Is absolutely horrific. Just been able to following it in the aftermath of October the 7th. Horrific. And we have a Labour government that is wanting to lie about Israel, accusing Israel of war crimes, accusing Israel of genocide. Have any of those journalists visited and seen the absolute terror and carnage that Hamas committed on October the 7th? This narrative goes out the window. No one tells anything about the 1,200 Israelis that were murdered in the most horrific way by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad on the 7th of October, 2023. Do they tell the story of the 5,000 to 6,000 Israelis and foreign nationals who were critically injured by Hamas on that day? Do they tell the true story of the Israeli hostages that were taken from that Nova Music Festival, or they were taken from their beautiful, pristine kibbutzes back to that hellhole in Gaza, treated the most horrifically? But there wasn't any accounts of all those 251 hostages that were taken to Gaza. Did any, according to all their experiences, any Gazans show them love and support? And the crimes that Hamas committed, the sexual crimes that Hamas committed, and what they did to those young Israeli women at the Nova Music Festival is worse than what the Nazis did when they come in contact with the Jewish people. You can't compare the gas chambers, but the treatment of these women was horrific. Israel hides that. You only have to look and read the Civic Commission report to know what happened on that day. That between 5,000 and 6,000 Hamas terrorists took part in the biggest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust over 80 years ago. And the world's forgotten that. And the world then wants to blame Israel for defending herself, for actually sending her troops into Gaza and doing everything they can to prevent innocent civilians being caught up in this. And we know that Hamas use asymmetrical warfare. They hide behind women and children. They don't wear a military uniform, so they're very hard to detect. And last year I was interviewing a young Australian who's a Christian who works in Jerusalem with CMJ, and he was called up and wanted to fight. He wanted to stay in Israel, so I said, all right, I'll fight, but I'm going to join an elite commando group. Now, he was telling me on the interview I did on the Middle East Report with him last year, as he was sitting down in the studio, and as we were recording, he was literally saying that we were, in the beginning of the war, we were telling Gazans to leave the north, Gaza City, and go to Rafah because we're carrying out military operations. Now, this genocidal army, known as the IDF, right, that are so fearsome they just want to kill as many Palestinians as they possibly can. That is the impression that we get from our mainstream media, and that's how they portray Israel. But he was telling me that they came across some young Gazans who were asking for an armed escort to Rafah. These are the same soldiers that are being accused of genocide, and if Israel was committing genocide and war crimes against Gaza, why would these young Gazan Palestinians ask these Israeli soldiers for an armed escort to Rafah? Answer that question. But of course, our media doesn't ask that question, because what we are seeing is that lies and misinformation and hatred and the demonization of Israel is a curse that comes upon our nation, and it's a curse that comes upon our land. Because we know from Genesis chapter 12, 1-3, that I will bless those who bless Israel, and I will curse those who curse you. And as a broadcast journalist, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that come into action. And when we have our former Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, accuse Israel of committing genocide without any evidence, when we see that this government in Westminster has decided to suspend arms sales to Israel because this is being used to kill Palestinians, the narrative's the other way around. And these are the times in which we're living it. It's very hard to discern what is true. It's very difficult to discern what is actually happening in the days in which we're living in because of this hatred against Israel, that Israel doesn't get a fair trial. Israel is the only righteous nation and is a beacon of light in the Middle East. There is no other nation in the Middle East that is a true democracy, that has a Supreme Court with Israeli Arabs as supreme judges, for example, that can actually arrest and actually then sentence former Israeli prime ministers to prison. Israel has democratic institutions. It has the Knesset, and you can be an Arab and you can represent the Arab parties. They have that political freedom. They have freedom of speech. And the thing is, in Israel, I think there's too much freedom. And there's too much freedom of speech. But that is unique in the Middle East. It's the only place in the Middle East where Christians are actually thriving and being protected. And yet, did we see, for example, in Jerusalem, which Israel has given that religious freedom to all the main religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, with free access to worship all of them? Did that happen prior to Israel re-establishing the modern state of Israel in 48 when Jerusalem was divided, and then in 67 when Israel actually won the Six-Day War? Did this happen during the British? No, the British prevented the Jewish people from going to pray at the Western Wall, the Holocaust al-Maravi, during the Mandate years. So that was from 1917 all the way through up to 1948. No Jewish people were allowed to worship at the Western Wall. Now, when the Jordanians took control of the War of Independence from 48 to 67, did the Jordanians allow the Israelis or the Jewish people to pray at that most holy site in Jerusalem, the Western Wall, the containing wall of the Second Temple? No, they were denied. When Israel conquered Jerusalem, after it was invaded, an invasion on behalf of the Egyptians and on behalf of the Syrians were ready to invade and to wipe Israel out, Israel took preemptive action, and a preemptive strike destroyed the entire Egyptian, Jordanian, Syrian, Iraqi, Lebanese Air Force in one single day, giving Israel air superiority. And because of the news and reports that were coming out from Egypt and President Nasser saying, look, the Israelis are being defeated, this is when Jordan decided to attack Israel. Israel warned the Jordanian government, do not get involved, do not attack, or we will come after you. They ignored that advice. And of course, then we see the liberation of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem back in our hands again. And under Israeli sovereignty, and Jerusalem being under Israeli sovereignty, do Muslims, Jews, and anyone else, and Christians from so many different denominations, do they have religious freedom to worship in Jerusalem? Of course they do. But the world doesn't recognize that. And instead what we see is that the traditional churches are questioning Israel's right to exist, steeped in church replacement theology, which made the Jerusalem summit so important to redefine what our Christian creed is in the context of our biblical understanding regarding Israel and the Jewish people, and to understand the Jewish roots of our faith, to understand that our Messiah, Yeshua HaMashiach, was a Jewish rabbi and the Messiah of Israel, to know that Yeshua is returning, sadly not to Edinburgh, not to London, New York, or to Washington, D.C., but to Jerusalem. So is it any wonder that what we're facing really is an immense spiritual battle? And I'll tell you how our enemies use the media. As someone who's a journalist and a broadcaster, if you can imagine, for example, I'll just have a little bit of hands up how you guys get your news, and then we'll determine which media outlet has the most influence. So how many of you traditionally get your news from having a newspaper and reading a newspaper? Hands up, anyone? A few, not many. So that was the traditional form. And how many of you get your news from kind of radio stations, listening to radio stations? Few more. That's a bit more than the newspapers. And how many of you get your news from watching television? Yeah, vast majority of you. And how many of you get their news purely on social media? John, here we go, a few more. So, so there's a different age thing, right? So if you read a newspaper, okay, you read an article about Israel, you are reading with your eyes, you're reading the words, then the words process in your mind what is being said, so your mind interprets what's going on. If you listen to a radio broadcast or a news broadcast, you listen with your ears. It goes into your brain, and your brain assesses what is actually going on and what that news report is about. But if you watch television or if you watch social media videos, your brain doesn't get a chance to think because it's your eyes that are telling you what's going on. You see with your eyes, you see destruction, therefore your eyes are telling you what you are seeing rather than you actually discovering and researching what has truly happened. And this is what makes video and broadcasting so powerful, because it's about emotional intelligence. Our enemies know this. So the Islamists, whether it's Hamas, whether it's Hezbollah, whether it's the Houthis, whether it's Palestinian Islamic Jihad, whether it's Al-Qaeda, whether it's Islamic State, understand that the weakest part of any democracy, the underbelly of our democracy, is public opinion. How in democracy do you influence public opinion? You influence them by the media. And so therefore Hamas and all these other Islamist terrorist organizations use the media as a strategic weapon against Israel. So effectively what they do is they'll show emotional images of women and children crying, surrounded by a bomb shelter or a ruined building, and saying, this is what Israel's done. Right? Without giving the context of what's happened. And now what we're seeing is that we're living in an age where facts and verifying the story has gone out the window. If this is a good emotional story, like the bombing of one of the hospitals in Gaza back in November of 2023, Israel was accused of bombing a hospital, and before the BBC could check their facts, what we find out, these were missiles fired by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, deliberately targeting this hospital in Gaza. So again, the media getting it wrong. But the danger is of what this does is it alters government policy. And so therefore, what we're seeing on October the 7th, and to me, and having visited the kibbutzes, having visited one of those car parks with 1,200 cars burnt by Hamas and destroyed by Hamas on October the 7th, and Hamas also used a secret weapon that day. If you throw, for example, a grenade at a car, it may burn for 1 or 2 hours only, but they used a napalm-type weapon that meant that cars and buildings burnt for 12 or 13 hours and burnt people alive inside them. So the carnage was absolutely horrific. And so therefore, Hamas and their sponsors, the Qataris, through the Muslim Brotherhood, have been able to change the entire media landscape, accusing Israel of genocide, showing false news reports. And our media, instead of verifying the facts as you should as a good journalist, I'm not going to run a story. I'm not going to go on air and say something that I can't back up personally or verify, because then it becomes false and becomes misleading. But we're living in a time where it's all about an emotional response. But the danger of these false, manipulative, lying media reports is that they change public opinion. So Israel may win the war against Hamas, Israel may win the war against the Iranian regime and Hezbollah, but essentially what they do is they lose the propaganda war. And this is the war that our enemies are winning. And so what it does is when you get the public to turn against you, this changes government policy. As a direct result, we see much more hostile government action towards Israel. And this is the climate win. I was absolutely horrified back in when Labour won the election back in would have been about almost straight away, actually, in kind of July of 2024, going into 2025, that Israel is committing genocide, that Israel is deliberately starving the Gazans and denying and preventing international aid from feeding the Gazans. I'm like, but when has it ever been a responsibility for a nation at war to have the responsibility to feed their enemies? Did we as the British do this when we fought against the Nazis? Did we feed the Nazi population? Say, sorry, we have to be very, very careful here in how we conduct this war, because it's important that we provide humanitarian aid, even though we're actually fighting for our very existence and our very survival. Well, tell you, I've got news for you. Israel is fighting that war of very existence and very survival. And the difference is, and I'm going to quote Golda Meir, one of Israel's former prime minister, when she said, look, if the Arabs wanted peace, there would be peace. If Israel, for example, if the Arabs laid down their arms, there would be peace tomorrow. If we laid down our arms, there'll be genocide tomorrow against us. And this is the reality that Israel faces. That Israel is, in the Middle East, it's all about the perception of strength. If you are perceived as being strong, then you are on the offensive. But if you're considered being weak and vulnerable, then you are primed for attack. And that's exactly what happened in Israel on October the 7th. Israel faced that existential threat from Hamas because that perception of Israel being a strong, powerful nation was broken. The most secure crossing border in the world, the Eretz crossing from Gaza into Israel, was broken and destroyed. And but out of this, I think what we're seeing really is a complete change in Israel's fortunes. On October the 7th or October the 8th, Israel was in a very, very dangerous place, a very, very precarious place. And again, I think we have to see the mercies of God take place, because had Hezbollah joined in on October the 7th, and they have an operation for this called Operation Conquer the Galilee, we would now be having Israel would have faced Hamas invading the south, Hezbollah invading the north, but instead of like thousands of casualties, we're looking at tens of thousands murdered. We'll be looking at hundreds, if not thousands, taken as hostage back to southern Lebanon, held by Hamas. We would see it would take weeks, if not months, to clear Hezbollah from the Galilee. All the time, we'd see rockets and missiles being fired at Israel from Hezbollah, from Hamas, also from Syria as well. But the God that we serve, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and his name is Adonai Se'avot, the Lord of armies and the Lord of hosts, comes into his own when it comes to Israel, because Israel is the apple of his eye. You ask the Lord who he loves. And I asked this as a teenager growing up, Lord, what is the thing that you love more than anything else? Because I want to love that. And I kept getting repeated time and time again. It's Israel, it's my Jewish people. They are the apple of my eye. They are my heritage. And I think when we look at the times in which we're living in, it's the Jewish people. It's the Jewish people that have given us the most precious thing we have. Yeshua HaMashiach, the Messiah, our Bible. If it wasn't for these Jewish scholars taking time and due diligence to write the scriptures down for us, the very word of God, where would we be today? Jewish people have given us our moral code with the Ten Commandments. They have given us our moral code for our entire civilization. They've given us the prophets. They have given us the apostles as well. And they will also give us the greatest evangelists the world has ever seen, with 144,000 Messianic Jewish believers, that during the darkest period of world history, during the tribulation period, when Satan has his man as the president of a one world government, will literally be responsible for bringing billions into the kingdom of God. So is it any wonder that Satan hates Israel? Is it any wonder he hates the Jewish people? Is it any wonder he hates the nation of Israel? Because they remind him of his future. They remind him that he is condemned for eternity because he rebelled against God. And we need to look, when we're looking at stuff, particularly looking at the Middle East today, that after the horrors of October the 7th, Israel, through prayer, I believe, fundamentally, has literally transformed the entire landscape of the Middle East. Israel destroyed 18 battalions of Hamas in Gaza over the last couple of years. We also see that they have destroyed the jewel in the crown of the Iranian regime, which is Hezbollah. And many of you will kind of remember those incredible news stories of the walkie-talkies and the pages going off, killing all the Hezbollah terrorists, maiming them. And what that did is it's because they were then told, look, don't trust your mobile phones because the Israelis are listening. But hey ho, we've got our spies saying, if you use pages or if you use walkie-talkies, you can communicate without the Israelis listening. So we also see, for example, that the Mossad created a false firm and a false company that produced these pages and walkie-talkies, which Hezbollah built. It was like 10 years in the making. And the reason why Israel acted when they did is because in the summer of 2024, Hezbollah were preparing for Operation Conquer the Galilee, to send thousands of Hamas terrorists into the Galilee with rockets and missiles being fired at cover on a scale that we have not seen before. Even 20 years ago, when Israel fought the Second Lebanon War against Hezbollah, and they were going to use their terror tunnels that were dug out in the mountains to invade. The Israeli intelligence were aware of this, sent their military aircraft and jets to destroy the entire rocket and missile systems coordinated Israel. I think 200 Israeli aircraft took out those rockets and missiles that Hezbollah were going to do, and then launched this incredible operation to expose the Hezbollah leadership, then pushed Hezbollah all the way back up to the Litani River, and actually then killed the terror chief belonging to Hezbollah, Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah. Now, how is this for justice? That Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah has hated Israel with a passion all his life. He's head of a terror organization that is sponsored by the Iranian regime that wants to destroy the Jewish people. And he famously said that he wants all the Jewish people to come back to the land of Israel, because from there it will be easier to actually murder and kill all the Jews in one single place. His lasting picture he has in mind before he died was he was in a bunker thinking he was completely safe and immune from any Israeli response or any Israeli attack. He was there watching the UN Security Council. He was watching the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking and addressing the UN Security Council, thinking, what's he going to say about Lebanon? And as he was watching that news report on his television set, a bunker-busting bomb penetrated his building, killed him and his entourage. We've also seen the collapse of President Assad's regime in December of 2024. One of the Iranian regime's biggest sponsors collapsed. Then what we saw as well in response to this, the Iranian regime fired rockets and missiles into Israel, and then Israel took out strikes to destroy the Iranian air surface missiles, some secret new research centers. And so we've seen that then now Israel is engaged in this battle against the head of the snake, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Israel has dealt with their proxy terror organizations. Now Israel is effectively dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, if you can imagine going back prior to 2003, prior to October the 7th, what would happen if Israel, and you've got to understand that Israel's main foreign policy objective is to prevent the Iranian regime from acquiring nuclear weapons, because the Jewish people in Israel know from history that when a nation or tyrants threaten the Jewish people with annihilation, they usually mean it. And we've seen that with Hitler. And and he actually wrote this in Mein Kampf in 1924, outlining his whole entire plans and purposes to wipe out the entire Jewish people. No one believed Hitler. In the same way, no one believed the Iranian regime would have nuclear weapons to wipe Israel out. Now, if it hadn't been for October the 7th, if it hadn't been for the fact that Israel systematically has taken out the Iranian regime's terror proxies, Israel wouldn't have been in a position to fly over Syrian airspace to actually destroy the Iranian regime's nuclear weapons program, and together with the Americans. Because we know, for example, that Israel is that beacon of light, that yes, Israel does not do what the international community wants it to do, because if Israel did what the international community wanted to do, there would be no Israel today. And this is what we're seeing really is incredible, because what it means is that the world has also forgotten anything between 40,000 and 100,000 of the most bravest, courageous people you'll meet on the earth, Persians who love their country, who want freedom, were massacred and brutally murdered in the most horrific manner by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And it's interesting, isn't it, that when we see everything going on in the Middle East, this big battle now between Israel, the United States, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, which our government then refused to say we want no part of it, delayed, for example, Americans taking off from the island in the Indian Ocean, the island of Garcia. And as a direct result of that, the Iranian regime's fired 2 ballistic missiles that were heading for the island of Garcia. Our Prime Minister actually decided to hide that and not present that information. It wasn't until it was reported in American media did we understand it. So we know that the Islamic Republic of Iran doesn't just represent a threat to Israel. It doesn't just represent a threat to the Middle East, but it essentially represents a threat to the entire Western world. And how we are having journalists and politicians saying that this is not a war. How is this not a war if a regime that's influenced by Islamic extremism and the Islamic Revolution, who are part of their theology, believe that they want the 12th Imam or the Mahdi to return to Tehran? And the story within Shia theological tradition is that the 12th Imam went as a 12-year-old boy, went into a cave and went missing and never came back. And when he comes back, he will restore the Islamic world empire belonging to the Shia. And there are people within the Islamic Republic of Iran, like the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, who are part of an inner core who are known as the Hochatirs. Now, the Hochatirs believe that they need to trigger an Armageddon-style scenario in order for the Mahdi to return. So what is the West thinking? When we're dealing with a regime who have actually then carried out terrorist attacks on this soil, they have been responsible for the murder of US Marines in 1982 in Lebanon. 242 US Marines were murdered at the hands of the Iranian regime. They also murdered representatives of the French and American embassies, as well as the US Marines took and murdered William Buckley, who was the CIA station chief back in 82. They took Terry Waite hostage. The Iranian regime, ever since it's come to power in 1979, has been against the West. Now, the danger, I think, for President Trump, and he signed the most horrific deal known as the Memorandum of Understanding, which is complete capitulation to the Iranian regime, giving them everything they want. And this is the danger that we face, essentially allowing the Iranians to sell their oil and to open up the Straits of Hormuz to international shipping. As a direct result, the Americans will then give the Iranian regime $300 billion US, end sanctions, and no guarantees or promise that they will stop their nuclear weapons program. No guarantees they will stop their ballistic missile program either. But the only hope is that those Straits of Hormuz would be open again. So we need to pray that, and we've seen that the Iranians have broken the latest ceasefire agreement and the Memorandum of Understanding. And President Trump only last week called them scumbags for doing so. But we have to realize that we're at war. And we also know that that war is here. And I'm going to end on this shortly, that we saw that from 2003 right up until 2024, that the Islamic Republic of Iran had complete control and dominance over the Middle East, known as the Shia Crescent. They dominated Iran, they dominated Syria, they dominated your nation, and they've radicalized Yemen, sadly. And Yemen, they have control and influence over Lebanon, and the influence Hezbollah and Hamas, and their final goal was to destroy and conquer Jerusalem. Now, the Iranians have lost their Shia Crescent. Their nuclear weapons program has virtually been kind of wiped out. They have no air force. They have no navy because they've been wiped out. And anyone to think that the Iranians lost the war, not the Americans or the Israelis. And on top of this is a new power that is emerging, and that is of the Muslim Brotherhood, who are the Qataris, and also seeing their influence with the president of Syria, al-Shams, together with President Erdogan of Turkey, and they are the new threat against Israel. Now, that's the Middle East, but the sad thing is that they've created a Trojan horse here in Britain, here in Europe, and across the United States. The Qataris have spent billions in infiltrating our universities. They are using commercial airlines deals with Qatari Airlines to influence Sky and ITV's news coverage and other media news outlets so that they can influence editorial control. We even see, for example, Charles took over 2 million euros in suitcases and plastic bags from the Qatari regime. And we see that they are influencing our mosques to pump out these jihadist ideology. Now, what makes the Muslim Brotherhood so dangerous is that they are everywhere. And are these terrorists wearing camouflage jackets with AK-47s? No. These guys are wearing suits and ties. They're the ones that are influencing our Foreign Office. They're the ones that are influencing the US State Department. They're the ones that are influencing our counter-terrorism policies. And they are the ones who have now infiltrated the West. And so we're seeing that the Qataris are leveraging that huge amounts of money. And I believe that they are the main reason, for example, why President Trump has capitulated to the Iranian regime, because this war is costing the Qataris billions. But the Qataris like to present themselves as allies of the West. They are there negotiating a peaceful peace agreement between the Americans, the Pakistanis, and to say how we can bring this solution to an end, knowing they ultimately want to destroy the West. And they have a 100-year plan, and they're more than 50 years through that plan. So I believe that we are ending where we are prophetically, is that we are in the season of the hunters, described in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 16. First, the Lord sends out talks about the Jewish people coming back from the land of the north, and the Lord would send out fishermen. Now, ICEJ UK and ICEJ have been one of those ministries that have acted like fishermen to fish the Jewish people home, primarily from the former Soviet Union back to Israel in fulfillment of prophecy. Now we're living in a time where we are in the season of the hunters. And that influence between that Nazi ideology that we saw in the Second World War is not dead. It's just infused with Islamism. So today's hunters are Nazi Islamists who will stop at nothing to destroy the Jewish people. This also explains why our media has been infiltrated. This explains why our government has been infiltrated. Explains why our government institutions, even local councils, have been infiltrated, together with that of our trade unions. We are now the minority in this great nation and great island of ours. And we have a moral duty to love what God loves. And I believe fundamentally with all my heart that is Israel and the Jewish people, because that is the land he's coming back to. This is a nation that he's restored after 2,000 years in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Hebrew language was a dead language for well over 2,000 years until Ben Yehuda rewrote and designed a Hebrew language for the Jewish people. And today, 12 million people around the world speak modern Ivrit. This is a testimony to the living God. And God has a promise to Israel through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will make you a people ever before me. And we see that because no other world empire has outlived the Jewish people. They're still here. And this is why tomorrow, when we've been invited on behalf of the Jewish community in Glasgow to have a joint event at their prestigious synagogue, is an incredible opportunity to show them how much they love Israel, how much their God loves who they are. But it's up to us to remind the Jewish people of who their God is and who they are and what God's called them to be, because they need our friendship, they need our support. And you can do that by supporting this wonderful ministry that is the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and let's put these words in action, because we are literally in the fight of our lives. Thank you.